What's going on, y'all? Walker Montgomery here, and welcome to episode 7 of Whiskey Wednesday. I've got Logan and Mac Haynes here of Basement Rickhouse. We're going to keep on talking and extend our episode from last month. Y'all do classes.
We do.
Right here.
Yep.
So, obviously, we're not going to give away all your tricks on Whiskey Wednesday, but just kind of tell me about one. You obviously know a little bit about it. So,
right.
what was the moment where you're like, all right, well, hell, we're doing all this, we might as well do a class?
Yeah. We started running into a lot of people that had, watched a documentary or they had watched something on YouTube and given advice and having been trained to do it, at a professional level, first, there's no wrong way to drink bourbon, right? You want to pop the cork and just turn up the bottle. That's on you, right? Whatever you want to do, there's no wrong way to do it. So what we want to do is just kind of start teaching people the way that I was taught how to do it. There's different techniques. And so we just kind of walk people through that, through the way that Buffalo Trace taught me to do it, and how to pull out flavors, how to maximize some of those tasting notes. If you're new to bourbon, how to make it to where it doesn't burn your nose hairs when you go to nose the bourbon, and make you start coughing immediately and all of that. So we kind of walk people through that, and then we partner with some distilleries and some bars and just bourbon enthusiasts that want to learn more about the spirit and more about the story. So we get into the science behind it, how it's made. How do you take that, that corn kernel and turn it into this beautiful brown liquor? What's the steps?
So it's more than just, hey, here's how to properly drink whiskey.
Right, definitely. Yeah. We don't want to just say, this is how you do it, right? We want people to be able to enjoy it. And so we'll do the little history of it. Sometimes when we'll have a couple of different bottles lined up, we'll talk about how they're all related. How are they the same? How are they different? And we'll tell the story of like how they're actually all connected, which is pretty cool. And then we like to be able to give people the opportunity to become hosts themselves, right? So you don't want to just sit by yourself and drink. You want to be able to share it, and you want to be able to share it correctly. Yeah. And for us, correctly just means don't make your opinion fact, right? Give everyone the chance to figure out what's there for them. And so we take that time so that they can get into it, learn about it, taste it, and then go forward and make sure that they can be good ambassadors for the spirit.
And we walk people through, if you don't get the, nose of a 1978 Oldsmobile leatherback seat when you nose a bourbon, like that's okay. That's fine. We tell a story all the time of Jimmy Russell. Jimmy is the master distiller at Wild Turkey. Yeah. Jimmy has been there over 60. He's the longest serving master distiller in the history of ever. And he's getting interviewed by this guy that does reviews and is big in the, press, if you will, for bourbon. And, this guy's kind of trying to show off a little bit and say, when I drink or nose your Wild Turkey stuff, I get these notes of cherry. I get these notes of vanilla. I love the tobacco taste on the finish, and starts naming off all these like obscure flavors, and again, trying to show off. And he asked Jimmy, he said, Jimmy, how do you get these flavors? What is it that you do in your process and your aging that you're able to pull some of this out? And Jimmy, the most successful master distiller, looks at him and says, I don't know about any of those flavors that you just named. Yeah. He goes, I just know if it's a good bourbon or a bad bourbon. And so, when we're talking to people about, kind of creating their own internal reviews or people that are wanting to get into social media, don't press those things upon other people as though if you can't do those things, you're lesser than. Yeah. Right. If Jimmy Russell ain't pulling out cherry and tobacco and all these flavors, he's doing okay, and so are you.
Yeah, he's doing just fine. Yeah. But I mean, that's good, because we were talking a little bit earlier about wine and how so many, wine snobs. Right. Essentially it's like, you get the flavors. And look, I like wine, red wine. I can tell the difference, as I'm sure most people can, between a good wine and a bad wine. I still like Yellowtail. But it's like bourbon is so different because it doesn't have, and I've gathered from you talking about the community, that kind of upper echelon thing going on. It's just for everybody.
Yeah, that's what it was, certainly intended to be. From when you saw bourbon and whiskey being made here in the States, back in the 16 and 1700s, it was always meant to be something for everybody. It was made out of really a convenience factor because they didn't want to haul a whole bunch of bushels of corn and use that as their trade, use that as their currency. So they started distilling that corn and using that. So it was made out of convenience. It was never made to be this pinky in the air, nose in the air, drink, which, is what one of the things that we're trying to do is kind of trying to guard this industry from that because, that can start to creep in if you're not careful. Again, as we told you, our motto is it's not about what you're drinking, it's about who you're drinking with. And if that's the focus, it doesn't matter what flavors, what notes, or how many bottles you have in your bar. It's just a matter of having a good time and making some memories.
I agree. So y'all both are history buffs. Yep. I want to get stories from both of y'all. We talked a little bit earlier. Who wants to go first? I know that you got one that involves music. I know that you got one that involves
cool women.
Some cool women. Just go. Whoever wants to go first, I'll let you run.
All right, ladies first.
Yep. Ladies first.
All right, cool. All right, so my story is about a really strong Kentucky woman. So back in the early 1900s, a lot of women were able to take over family businesses, right? So Mary Dowling, mother of 10, can you imagine?
Some major breeding right there.
Right? She becomes a widow. So now she's a single mom of 10. And her husband's business was distilling. And it was over in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky. So stone's throw away from here. She refused to shut down the business and turn it over to one of his old partners. She wanted to keep running it. Fortunately, she had to shut it down because of Prohibition. One of the nice rules about Prohibition was, though, that if you had pre-Prohibition whiskey in your basement, you could still use it for medicinal purposes or for small parties. She had a very large basement. So you can tell we're a fan of her work, right?
Yeah.
And so she was having some visits, some parties. Unfortunately, she was also bootlegging it and got caught for it. She was refused a medicinal whiskey license like all the other guys. And so she had to figure out what to do. So she did.
Yeah. So you had at that time options. You could turn it over to the government. You could
pour it out.
You could destroy it yourself. You could pay taxes. Or you could sell what you had in storage to some of the people that had these medicinal whiskey barrels. And so one of those people that she sold it to was Julian Van Winkle. Now, we know that name as Pappy Van Winkle. And so that was where she got rid of a lot of her inventory, but not all of it.
Yeah.
So she got caught by the feds bootlegging out of her basement, which is pretty unfortunate. So she got put on trial. And unfortunately, for some, between the recess, the court reporter mysteriously died. Not sure why or how.
And this is after she fainted on the stand, right?
Yeah.
So it would be a great movie.
Oh, it's going to be phenomenal when it gets out there. So she faints on the stage. They have to go to recess. During recess, the court reporter dies. No one can read any of his notes, so she gets off, which is great. But she can't stay in Lawrenceburg anymore. So she has to take her business across country lines. So she goes down to Mexico with some of the Beam family and starts her distillery down there. So it's the Mexican Distilling Company, Dowling Mexican Distilling Company. And she's making some really great whiskey down in Mexico. And some of her fans up here start bringing it back. They like that stuff so much that Pappy Van Winkle could not push his own bourbon in the area because her Mexican bourbon was better.
He wrote her a letter saying, I'm really having a hard time selling the whiskey that you sold me because everybody's wanting your illegal bootleg, whiskey out of Mexico instead. So it was a major challenge, but that goes to show you how great her whiskey was.
Yep. And so she continued to distill down in Mexico for a while. And so we think she's one of the reasons why bourbon has to be made in America. Yeah. So it is a law that was passed in 1964 that bourbon has to be an American product. And we think one of the reasons is because she was kicking everyone's tail from Mexico.
Yeah, there was legislation that was proposed for years before it actually passed in 1964, not long after Prohibition, to make bourbon a distinctive product in the United States. And that's because, old Mary Dowling, out of Lawrenceburg, Kentucky, was kicking everybody's tail outside of Mexico.
That is a movie coming right there.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a wild story.
We'll give you 10%.
Yeah, there you go. Give me 10%.
That's right.
All right, hit me with yours now.
So, it's cool that you're, doing this show, because there's such a great tie between the whiskey industry and music. So one of my favorite stories of whiskey goes back again to Prohibition. So could you imagine, Prohibition, we call that the dark ages in the whiskey world, right? Could you imagine trying to actually open a bar during Prohibition? How could that have ever happened? Well, so there was a guy by the name of Marty O'Brien, his wife Dolly. Marty was up in the New England area. He got fired from the pencil factory, down on his luck, had run out of options. And so he moved his family to New Jersey. The Hamilton line, everything's legal in New Jersey. That's one of the reasons why he moved there. And he got into boxing, right? Mm-hmm. So he was a boxer. And not long after starting his boxing career, which wasn't going terrible, so he had a little bit of luck for the first time ever, he broke his hand, and all of a sudden his boxing career was dead and gone. And so couldn't work, couldn't read, couldn't box. He had nothing. Mm-hmm. And so his wife, Dolly, so apparently there's some power with the name Dolly. Yeah. Dolly steps up and she had gotten a job. She had worked for 2 mayors in a row in the town they were in New Jersey. And these mayors were, connected, I guess you could say. I guess you would call it the early days of the mob.
Yeah.
And so, she got in pretty good with them, and they had decided that they were not going to enforce the Prohibition laws. And so she opened a bar, and it was actually called Mob, M-O-B, which was named after her husband, Marty O'Brien. And so
coincidence there.
That's right. That's right. So rather than putting blackout curtains on the windows and saying it's a hardware store, she was putting drink signs in the window of "Here's today's drink special" during the middle of Prohibition, right? And so, this went on, and she killed it. I mean, she was rocking it. They had their family, their kids started getting involved. Their son actually started playing music at the Mob Bar, and they really had this protection from the mob, not the name mob, but the actual mob, the gangster mob. And so they were really kind of protecting them. And they did so well that, Dolly's son, she bought him a car at 15 years old in the middle of the Great Depression, in the middle of Prohibition, brand new car at 15, unheard of. But he earned it because he was playing music there. He had drawn a crowd. People were coming. People were listening to his music. And that kid grew up to be Frank Sinatra.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the story.
He turned out all right.
He did all right.
I guess there's worse people you could have protecting you
that's right.
than the mob.
And so people go, well, how did he go from an O'Brien to Sinatra? Well, his dad was a boxer.
Yeah.
They were very, very Italian. You don't get much more of an Italian name than Sinatra, right? And so very, very Italian. But Italian boxers at that time weren't respected.
Yeah.
And so his dad changed his name to Marty O'Brien to be able to have a little bit of respect in the boxing world.
That's a story too. I had no idea about I had no idea about either of them, but it turned out Frank Sinatra. They just opened a Frank Sinatra bar. If y'all are ever down in Nashville, they just opened a Sinatra bar down on 2nd Avenue, and it looks badass.
Yeah. They got Jack Daniels has a Sinatra version. Dedicated to him.
It's all over Nashville too. I guess they stopped making that though.
Well, that's the other thing about Frank Sinatra. Just sticking with the Frank Sinatra theme, Frank Sinatra had such an impact on the line of Jack Daniels that in the 50s, the Rat Pack, that was pretty much what they were drinking. There was a national shortage of Jack Daniels.
Yeah. My old friend Jack.
That's right. And so you had companies very similar today. We talk about liking, to tell stories about bourbon and about whiskey. There were companies that came online at that time to try to create a good story. Mm-hmm. And so one of those was Ezra Brooks. And so Ezra Brooks had no story. There was no such person as Ezra Brooks. But if you look at a bottle of that time, Jack Daniels was, old sipping whiskey. Ezra Brooks was like, good sipping with, like they completely ripped off the bottle shape, the label, the number 7 on the label, ripped off every single thing about it. And so naturally, Jack Daniels sues them. And then Jack Daniels proceeds to lose because it was from Kentucky, had that Kentucky logo on it, and it was a different product. It had a different name. They weren't calling it Jack. But everything else, it was identical.
It was identical.
So Jack Daniels had some big shakeups in the whiskey industry.
All right, well, we got just a few more minutes left. I don't even know how to ask this final question. Just tell me about your experience with Vanilla Ice.
So, way we always start this story is the internet is stupid. That's really all we can say is the internet is absolutely insane. So, after starting a TikTok channel by accident and, seeing some success there, we had an insurance company reach out to us. And this insurance company said, hey, we're having our annual conference down in the Carolinas, and we'd love to fly you down, and you guys lead a tasting of Van Winkle with Van Winkle. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, so Julian is coming down. Julian, who's Pappy's grandson, who runs the Van Winkle line now, or Preston, who is Julian's son, they're coming down, so they want us to be part of that. Sure, don't know why, but cool. And again, it's like insurance, we have insurance, but that's like our extent of our insurance, knowledge. And so, they kind of heard the hesitation in our voice, and they were like, you probably don't recognize his name. It's actually Rob Van Winkle. I'm like, Rob Van Winkle.
Never heard of him.
Nothing.
Not ring. Is that like a cousin? And they go, well, you know him by his stage name, Vanilla Ice. And immediately I was like, yep, we'll be there. Tell us when, book our flights and let's go. And so, they flew us down to this insurance conference and, got to hang out with them, did a Q&A with them, and just had a ton of fun with them.
I mean, I had a blast because I loved listening to all that great 90s music. And so he did his songs and then he covered all sorts of other 90s music. So I'm like rocking out, having a blast at this concert. And Logan's back in the back holding on to the bottles of Pappy Van Winkle to make sure nobody takes them or breaks them or anything. Cause that's what we're there for. Yeah. And so finally, Vanilla Ice is on stage an hour over, which is great, except for the fact that all of the VIP people and all of the bigwigs are back in the back, jonesing to open up this Pappy Van Winkle. So finally they get back there and we have a bottle of 12-year-old, a bottle of 15-year-old, and a bottle of 20-year-old. And the owners of the company are being very careful. We have these very nice glasses, and we're just going to do little tiny pours in them. And then all of a sudden, people just keep filling the room. And so we end up...
Vanilla Ice invited everybody that was in the area.
Pretty much, yeah. So then the red Solo cups come out. So we start pouring 20-year-old Pappy Van Winkle into red Solo cups and passing it around the room. And then before we get started, we get to take a moment to make sure that he knows how to do the Kentucky Chew correctly, which is, how you smell it and how you taste it and all of that. And so we went through and did that. And then we all did a great big cheers and drank with Vanilla Ice.
So we have a one-of-a-kind bottle in our collection, and it is a bottle of 12-year-old Van Winkle that is signed by Vanilla Ice. So that's...
I guarantee you that's one of a kind.
There is no other one anywhere. So.
That's one of a kind. Yep. That's the most random story ever. I love it.
Yep.
I love it.
The internet's stupid.
The internet is stupid. Well, hey, I appreciate y'all joining me. It was a good time talking. I mean, y'all are so knowledgeable. I appreciate you taking the time. Where can we find you on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever? What's it called? A handle or something? Yeah, Instagram handle. Tell me that.
Yep. So TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, basement_Rickhouse. Go to basementrickhouse.com. See our events and things like that we've got coming up as well, and merch and all kinds of stuff.
Sweet. Well, hey, I appreciate y'all. Hope y'all enjoyed this episode of Whiskey Wednesday. We'll see you next month.
Cheers.